Hi everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why you can sometimes do something perfectly without even thinking about it? But other times, every tiny mistake feels like an alarm bell going off in your head. Why do we notice some errors immediately, while others just seem to slide by? That is the mystery we are diving into today. Researchers have been looking at two very different types of everyday actions, walking and grabbing objects, to see how our brains actually handle mistakes and how they decide what is worth noticing. We spend our whole lives adapting to the world. When you walk on uneven ground or reach for a cup that is not quite where you thought it was, your brain makes tiny, lightning-fast corrections. This is called sensorimotor adaptation. It is how you stay graceful even when things change around you. But the big question is, are you aware of these corrections? And how does your brain decide when to wave the red flag and tell you that something has gone wrong? To figure this out, researchers set up two experiments. In one, they had people walk on a treadmill where the two belts could move at different speeds. This forces your body to compensate for the imbalance, essentially making you limp to stay upright. In the other experiment, they asked people to reach out and grab objects, but they added a sneaky mirror trick to make the object look like a different size than it really was. They used two different ways to introduce these challenges. One was a very smooth, gradual change, kind of like slowly turning up the heat in a room so you barely notice the difference. The other was a jumpy, unpredictable pattern that kept the brain on its toes. They were interested in something special as well. They tracked the pupils of the volunteers. You know how your pupils dilate when you are surprised or uncertain? They wanted to see if the pupils could act like a secret window into the brain, telling us when the person noticed the problem without them actually needing to say anything. They called this a no-report marker, which is basically just a way to spy on the brain when the person is not reporting their thoughts. So, what did they find? First, it turns out that when the challenge is introduced slowly, the brain handles it without much fuss. Because you are adapting smoothly to the change, your brain does not really flag it as a big deal. People were much less likely to notice the treadmill was being tricky or the object was the wrong size when the changes were gradual. But when the challenge was erratic and constant, people noticed it way more often. It seems that your brain uses both the physical size of the mistake and how surprised it is by that mistake to decide if you need to know about it. The pupil data was the most fascinating part. The pupils were incredibly sensitive to how uncertain the person felt. When the challenges were unpredictable, the pupils actually got a little bit wider, likely because the brain was working harder to figure out what was happening. It turns out that your eyes really are the windows to your soul, or at least to your brain's confusion level. However, even though the pupils did respond, they were not good enough to act as a perfect lie detector or a perfect silent reporter for every single trial. It was more about an average feeling of uncertainty rather than a precise count of every mistake. At the end of the day, what does this actually mean for you? It means that your brain is a professional at blending in. It wants to keep things running efficiently, so if it can hide a mistake or fix it smoothly before you even notice, it will absolutely do that. The fact that the same patterns showed up in both walking and grabbing objects suggests that our brains use a similar, universal playbook for error correction, regardless of whether we are moving our legs or our hands. This is a really clever study because it shows that the way we learn is not just about raw data, it is about strategy. We choose when to pay attention. If you are learning a new sport or trying to get better at a musical instrument, the takeaway is simple. Sometimes the way you practice matters as much as what you practice. If you introduce challenges gradually, your brain might smooth them over without you fully grasping the skill, but if you keep things a bit unpredictable, you might stay more aware of your performance. Now, this study was not perfect. The researchers noted that while their eye tracking worked for the most part, it is notoriously hard to get perfect data when people are moving around. There is always a gap between what we see in the lab and how our brains work in the wild. Future studies could look at how this changes as we get older or how it works for people who have specific brain injuries. There is still so much to learn about how we stay in control of our own bodies. It is amazing to think that every time you take a step, your brain is running a complex calculation that balances speed, accuracy, and awareness. Next time you catch yourself stumbling or miscalculating, just remember that your brain is hard at work trying to keep things smooth, even if it is keeping you in the dark about how many mistakes it is fixing behind the scenes. If you enjoyed this dive into how we tick, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. Have you ever noticed yourself adapting to a quirk in your daily life without even realizing it? Let us talk about it in the comments below. Thanks for hanging out at the Mind Lab, and I will see you in the next one.